About 100 billionaires in America woke up this week to a very, very big problem. A big problem that's got all of them boarding their jets to collectively fly to Billionaire Bunker, Idaho, to try to come up with a plan to figure out who the hell they've got to pay off in this election to make this very, very big problem disappear. And why is this a big problem? Because for the first time in a very long time, a judge actually had the balls to stand up and do something for the American people that judges did generations ago on the regular. So let's talk about what Google being deemed a monopoly actually means, what's going to happen to them, and how we can keep the pressure on to get the next 15 monopolies busted up just like this one. Let's get into it. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Perhaps for the first time since its founding, Google has encountered a problem so big they couldn't buy, borrow, manipulate, or bribe their way out of it when on Monday, August 5th, Judge Mata ruled that they are in fact a monopoly. And that has massive repercussions. That has some legal analysis calling it the most important antitrust case of the century. And now we're going to get into exactly why and what that means for the other monopoly cases on the horizon. In his ruling from the bench, Judge Mata said, after having carefully considered and weighed the witness testimony and evidence, which took place in court last year, by the way, with closing arguments in May of this year, he found the following conclusion. Google is a monopolist, and it has acted as one to maintain its monopoly. He issued a 277-page ruling that was riddled with some pretty amazing and terrifying facts that inspired his decision. Among the more shocking statistics that came out during the trial, Google enjoys an 89.2% share of the market for general search services, but that increases to 94.9% on mobile devices. While Google had steadfastly argued throughout the entirety of the trial that the reason they had such a large market share was simply because they were the best, the evidence pointed in a different direction, demonstrating that Google had been regularly engaging in tying arrangements and paid contractual arrangements with cell phone companies to make sure that they were the search engine of choice that was locked onto the phones at the time of activation. In fact, Google spent more than $26 billion with a B to lock in those default agreements in 2021 alone, paying almost $20 billion of that to Apple and the other $6 billion to Android. This ended up being a real sticking point for Judge Mata, who noted repeatedly during the trial that Microsoft's Bing search engine had 80% share of the market when you engaged on the Microsoft Edge browser, which demonstrated clearly that if other search engines could be successful, if Google weren't already determined by the tying arrangements created by their payments to these cell phone companies. And so he deemed this highly anti-competitive conduct. While we won't know the actual penalties that Google's going to suffer for some time because Judge Mata has actually ordered another trial just to determine the penalties, we do think there's a high likelihood that he could stop or limit their ability to have tying arrangements paying other brands for guaranteed access to their consumers like Apple and Android. There's also a chance that he could engage in forced divestiture, which hasn't happened since the antitrust cases of AT&T in the 1980s. Now, one thing that we do know for certain is that by forcing them to stop engaging in these tying arrangements and these paid placements, they're going to hurt other companies' profits too. Those companies, also, many are monopolies. Let's talk about what it would do to Apple's profits when you think about the fact that Google paid Apple an estimated $20 billion in 2021 and 2022, which doubled. That accounts for 28% of their revenue in that cost center. So that would have a really large impact on their profits as well. Now, I know what you're thinking. You've got to be asking yourself, why do I care? What is this going to do for me and my family? Is this going to put food on our table? And the answer is, yeah, maybe. The reality is that right now we've had a hard time getting antitrust issues across the finish line when it comes to technology companies. And that's because the current antitrust laws that are written as they are right now were written at a time where technology was not conceived of at this scale. They were written specifically to curtail price fixing for consumers. Now, the problem is that those laws never conceived of a world where the product would be free for consumers but be engaging in price fixing on the back end. The reality is that for these big monopolies, companies like Meta and Google, which are both being prosecuted for antitrust issues right now, advertising revenue makes up almost all of their revenue, with advertising accounting for 98% of total revenue for Meta last year and 77.8% of total revenue for Google or Alphabet. Now, when you ask yourself, how is this going to help me? Well, the reality is that right now, the anti-competitive behavior and the price fixing that both Google and Meta are able to control is that they're able to control the advertising costs for all other corporations and companies, because so much of the advertising that takes place in America in the consumer and economic model we have right now takes place via Google, YouTube, Meta, and Instagram. Huge swaths of our advertising takes place there, especially with targeting of people 35 and under. And so as a result, they're able to set the prices artificially and completely speculative for everybody across the board. And it also means they're able to create arrangements that favor businesses that they want to favor and actually cause harm to businesses that they don't want to see succeed. You might be wondering why price fixing advertising somehow impacts your bottom line. Well, the reality is that advertising makes up between 14 and 30% of most companies' budgets as they're trying to grow and compete in a marketplace that is increasingly monopolized. When those same monopolies are able to price fix when it comes to advertising, it artificially inflates the cost for every company in every sector that needs to attract consumers, even if they're attracting consumers through trade advertising. So what that means is that if you want to buy from the mom and pop butcher shop down the street or the hardware store around the corner, or maybe you want to bring your kids to a mom and pop gymnastics studio, they are paying more for advertising than they otherwise would have to in a market where the prices weren't fixed and where there was competitive pricing for advertising market share. And so as a result, they have to artificially inflate their prices to afford those advertising costs, which make up such a significant portion of their expenses. And so because these monopolies are engaging in this price fixing that is artificially raising the cost for businesses, it is by design also artificially increasing the cost for consumers, and that's you, your family, and your bottom line. But advertising and fixing those prices is not the only way that they stop competition from succeeding or from disrupting the tech industry as it is right now. It turns out that there's a bunch of evidence that's come out that shows they're also engaging in entirely different types of anti-competitive behavior to make sure that there's never a small new tech company that can rise through the ranks and challenge their status as a monopoly in the industry. One of the ways that they've been able to control the rise and fall of small tech companies that are creating disruptive software or products is that they have funded or planted funders into the think tanks of development think tanks all across the United States to guarantee that they get to identify tech early and that they are able to control the investment into that tech and secure the acquisition of that tech before it's able to disrupt their place and their piece of the market share. As an example, I want to show you how many smaller tech companies Meta has acquired in just the last 7 years. Now, I had thought about trying to list them all on the screen until I started doing research. And I spent 6 hours yesterday figuring out that they had acquired over 200 small tech companies that were all creating products that could somehow disrupt their position and their place in the monopoly of market share that they currently enjoy the control over. So instead, I am going to show you those companies because there is simply not room on the screen. All of these companies were acquired by Meta in just the last 7 years. And while that looks terrifying, right, because none of these guys ever got their chance to show what they could actually do if given a fair and equitable chance at entering the market and rising through the ranks, this is not all. They also acquired all of those companies. All of these companies. Now, that looks terrible, right? But Alphabet acquired almost 100 more companies than they did in the same time frame. Now, as always, I try to give you a way to make a difference and continue the work we're doing to fight private equity and monopolies in our country. And what I've got for you right now is that if you have not had a chance yet, remember, I created a kit at the link in my bio that is free and takes less than 3 minutes where you can tell the DOJ and the FTC that you want them to keep doing this work, to hold private equity firms and monopolies that are engaging in these serial acquisitions, roll-up strategies, and monopolistic practices. You can tell them you want them to keep spending your taxpayer dollars in this way. And so if you want to, you can go to the link in my bio, use the free kit. You can send a letter in under 3 minutes. And hopefully by September, we will have more than 5,000 letters sent over. And we're going to see them pivot and continue to do more of this work. Now, I encourage you guys, when you're talking to politicians, to demand that they tell you whether or not they intend to keep the same people in charge at the FTC, because they are doing good work. And we're seeing more proactive work coming out of them than we've seen in a generation. And so if you support Lena Khan, you support Alvaro Bedoya, you support Rebecca Slaughter, and the rest of the team, I highly encourage you, when you speak to your senators or when you email them, that you encourage them to advocate for keeping them in their roles, advocating for consumers, regardless of the billionaires that are coming for their jobs and constantly calling on politicians to oust them, because they are the ones that are defending us, while politicians are the ones taking the money from billionaires and only passing laws that benefit them. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany. We work together to fight private equity, to save small businesses in our community, and to cheer for the fact that a monopoly is finally being held to account for their horrific conduct. We hope that continues with the upcoming lawsuits against Meta and Apple, and I will be here covering it for you.